The marriage came with rules. I learned them before I learned which hallways were safe to traverse alone. Separate rooms, no questions, no public affection. Daniel Monontoya kept his word about protection, but he was clear that this arrangement was nothing more than a contract etched in blood and obligation. The mansion we inhabited was vast, cold, and heavily fortified. Men with weapons stood at every entrance, eyes scanning for threats. Cameras tracked my every movement, creating the illusion of safety. I was secure in theory, yet the very air seemed infused with danger, thick with unspoken undercurrents. Daniel was a phantom in my life, rarely speaking unless absolutely necessary. When he did, his voice was calm and precise, each word carefully considered, meticulously measured. "This is not a prison," he told me on that first night, the distance palpable in the shadows that filled the room, thick and heavy. "But it is not freedom either." I nodded, unsure of which reality frightened me more. Days passed, a strange rhythm settling around me like an unwanted cloak. I ate alone at a lavish table set for one, the silence of the mansion amplifying my solitude. I slept with one eye open, always alert, feeling the walls press in on me. I listened to the whispers of the house as if it had its own secret language, learning its nuances, the subtle connections between the guards, the way doors closed softly but never truly locked. The routine quickly became familiar, haunting. One morning, the sound of movement beneath the house drew me from my thoughts. I descended into the underground gym, the air thick with the scent of metal and sweat. It was a stark contrast to the opulence above. Daniel stood alone in the center, his shirt damp from exertion, hands wrapped in the scars of his past. He looked up when I entered, his expression revealing nothing, devoid of any surprise. "You shouldn't wander," he said, the authority in his tone sending a shiver up my spine. "I don't intend to stay helpless," I replied, my tone resolute. He studied me, the intensity of his gaze unnerving. Then, with a gesture, he reached for a gun and placed it on the table between us, the glint of the metal catching the dim light. "Then learn," he instructed, the weight of his command resonating within me. Training quickly became a ritual, a lens through which I began to understand my new life. Daniel was relentless and efficient. He corrected my stance with brief touches, guiding me through the fundamentals of combat, teaching me how to breathe steadily, and how to keep my hands steady when fear threatened to overwhelm me. "If you panic," he said once, adjusting my grip, "you die." The gravity of his words struck me like a thunderclap. I absorbed every lesson, determined to forge a new version of myself within the harsh confines of this world. Slowly, something inside me transformed. My hands stopped shaking. My reflexes sharpened, each jab and kick becoming more instinctual. My fear learned obedience, compelled by the reality that surrounded me. The chains of my former life began to fall away, interwoven with the strength of newfound purpose. At night, I found myself straining to hear Daniel's footsteps outside my door. He never entered, never crossed that threshold into my sanctuary, maintaining a distance that felt both safe and woefully unfulfilled. It was strangely disappointing, this silence between us echoing louder than any gunfire. One evening, the power went out during dinner, darkening the room as flickering candles sprang to life. Shadows danced across the walls, mocking the distance between us. "Why marry me?" I ventured, breaking the silence, probing the void that had settled like dust around us. Daniel did not look up from his plate, the food barely touched. "Marriage is permanent," he replied. "Fear is effective." Not an answer meant to comfort, and yet it held a raw honesty that resonated within me. Days turned into weeks, and I became increasingly aware of the echoes of my past. I asked about my brother one night when the weight of unspoken truths became unbearable. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something dark clouding his expression. "Trust me," he said. "Let me handle it." I wanted to believe him, to find solace in his assurances. But reality struck sharply when the attack came just before dawn. Glass shattered, the sound slicing through the stillness and pulling me from sleep. Alarms screamed, ripping through the silence like a howl of wounded beasts. Gunfire erupted, the sharp retort piercing through the stillness of the night. I barely had time to react before Marco, one of Daniel's men, shoved me behind a marble column, urgency ringing clear in his command. "Stay down," he ordered, the authority in his tone trembling with the weight of the situation. A bullet found him instead. He fell without a sound, his body crumpling like that of a marionette severed from its strings. My hands closed around the gun Daniel had trained me to wield, trembling with both shock and adrenaline. I forced my hands to steady, the teachings of my training flooding my mind. Men burst into the hall, shadows moving like dark phantoms, guns raised and ready. I fired once. The shot rang out, echoing off the marble walls. One fell, then another. The noise ceased as abruptly as it had begun, leaving only silence and the harsh reality of betrayal. Bodies lay strewn across the floor, stark reminders of the life I had wedged myself into, the price of my new existence. Minutes later, Daniel arrived, blood staining his sleeve, urgency etched into his features. His gaze fell upon me, instantly scanning for signs of harm. Alive, standing. "They weren't after me," he said quietly, breathless in his urgency. I nodded, still processing the whirlwind of events. "They were after your wife." That night, Daniel stood outside my door for what felt like an eternity, uncertainty flickering in his usually composed demeanor. "This changes things," he murmured, his voice low, the implications heavy upon us. I knew he was right. The marriage was no longer just a contract. It had morphed into a declaration of war.